Everybody. This is a little weird not being there in person, so I'll trust the two of you at the front have to, make faces if I'm totally missing the mark because I can't see the audience. So I was a member of the Citizens Assembly in BC, and when Anita was reading out that passage about the selection meetings, I got goosebumps because it truly was a magical experience. It was a life-changing experience. I'm still at this 15 years later. And it really was, there was that magic in the room. And the most common thing we heard over the next 18 months as we went around the province is people saying, I wish I'd got that letter. I heard those letters were going out and I checked my mail every single day. I wish I'd got a selection letter. And so there was a genuine desire among citizens to be involved in something really important that they felt could really sort of change how they experience politics in the province. So the magic of the selection meeting sort of came crashing into reality in our first meeting of the Citizens Assembly, and we were bagpiped into the WASC Center, and it's this beautiful circular room, and we're sitting there, and Jack Blaney, our chair, gets up and says, I don't believe in Robert's Rule of Order. We're going to do this as much as possible by consensus, and you're going to learn to trust your fellow citizens. And I'm thinking, this man is crazy. Like, I'm not even sure we can agree on what's wrong. How on earth are we going to be able to agree on what's right and have something that's going to meet the needs of the many million British Columbians? So I don't think we got a lot of criticism that way we went into it all predisposed to change, that we were already made up our minds. And in fact, most of us, I remember, were thinking, well, this is a sort of fun exercise, but there's no way this is going to lead to any recommendation for change. Like that just requires it just seemed impossible to us that we could do that. So I guess what really surprised me is, like, we're constantly told BC is the wackiest of the provinces, the most polarized of the politics. And so even agreeing on what was bad was going to be almost impossible for us. And so I guess what was most surprising for me, once we started listening to each other and listening to British Columbians at hearings across the province, reading 1,600 submissions, I guess the biggest surprise was that BC wasn't actually that polarized. We were united both in our extreme disenchantment with the current system and in a sort of shared vision of how we would like politics to operate. And we have all these different labels of party labels and how we vote and how we stand on other issues that seem to polarize and divide us. But at its essence, there was a really unified feeling of how we'd like politics to be done. And that was surprising. And that, I think, led to the biggest thing I got out of the Citizens Assembly, which was faith in my fellow citizens to be able to tackle a complex issue in a thoughtful and collaborative way. Of course, I have now had my faith in our fellow citizens tested through way too many referendums, and they may just be too dumb for democracy. But what I saw, when you bring together people in a thoughtful way and give them time and resources, that there's really nothing better in terms of tackling complex, not as in too complicated for the average person, complex as in it touches every aspect of our lives. And so there's implications to everything we're doing, and we have to be thoughtful and consider those implications as we tackle our decisions. So talking just a little bit about how we worked, one of the really critical things about the Assembly was there were many different ways for people to contribute to what was going on in the discussion. And the most obvious one was the plenary sessions, because they were open to the public. And that's what gets written about a lot, and it's the most bizarre experience having academics and politicians tell you what you were thinking. But that was what was visible. And I think what was really overlooked was the importance of everything else, the small breakout discussion groups, the online forum that we had. So I was one of the more vocal people in the plenaries. I have no problem even appearing digitally in front of a group of people I can't even see. But people would come up to me afterwards and say, thanks so much for speaking up. I really appreciate that you did. You have to know I totally disagree with you, and here's my reasons why. And then we'd go on to have this really thoughtful discussion in the small breakout groups. And then in the 2 weeks between the next meetings, there were some people who wouldn't even participate, were still very quiet in small breakout groups, but we'd get home and I'd wake up, and I had an infant, so I was up very early in those mornings, 6 a.m. Monday morning, and there'd be 20 pages of new commentary of like, I went home and I thought about what so-and-so said and it didn't ring true, so I went and did some research, and here's the stats I'm finding, and can we discuss how these two stats contradict each other and what that means for our process. So there was a lot of different ways that people were contributing, and a lot of the most important stuff happened in the non-visible places. And I guess that would be one of my key learnings for new citizens assemblies, is that ability to speak in confidence is incredibly important, but we would need a better mechanism for reporting back, because some of those key decisions happen from behind the scenes work we were doing, and we needed to come back and say to people, hey, so we've just, and I'll cite a couple of examples, we've just gone through this work behind the scenes and here's our conclusion. Not necessarily here's what we all said when we were hashing it out. Because that leaves less room for interpretation of why, for example, we picked MMP over STV. And there's a lot written about this, and that, we had David Farrell talk to us and he's from Ireland, therefore we must have been predisposed to STV. That Ken Carty made a comment about zombie politicians in MMP, and that must have changed us because we are, not capable of independent thought, private citizens with no backing in this, and so therefore we must have been easily led. And in fact, what was going on behind the scenes is citizens would take an area that was really critical to them, and they'd do a lot of extra work on that, and they'd become experts in that area and they'd bring that in. So the sort of conversations that were happening, once we'd identified that, our core, we were looking for this balance between proportional representation and local representation and quality of choice for the voter, was that we felt really stuck for a while, because a lot of what we were seeing initially was that MMP was going to be more proportional than STV. So that we were going to have to sacrifice either proportionality, or on the other hand, we felt STV provided a better quality of local representation and more nuanced choices. So we felt for a long time that we were going to have to sacrifice one or the other. We had a member who was really great at running computer simulations. And so once we started talking about what our models of STV and MMP would look like, started running computer simulations to see how proportional they would both be in BC. And what we started seeing is they were going to deliver fairly similar levels of proportionality. And therefore that freed us up to focus on our other two values. And so, that was, I think, illustrates how much commitment the members had, that they would pursue this independent research and then come back and present, and it would be questioned, and we dig into it further, and we test theories. And also indicates the importance of having a mechanism to report back. What should have happened is we should have come back to the plenary and said, hey guys, we've had a fairly fundamental shift over the past 2 weeks, and here's what's been going on in our online forum, and here's the discussions we had yesterday that have led us to this place, so people could sort of see more of our inner workings. What we saw a lot that I think speaks again to the power of individual citizens was the how much we challenged sort of received norms. I think any Poli-Sci 101 textbook will say first past the post delivers great local representation, or delivers local representation. That's a strength. And right from day one, we had people specifically from anywhere outside of Metro Vancouver saying, hold on a second, I disagree with that. That's not my experience of first past the post. And so we started digging into what does local representation mean, and differentiating between quantitative local representation of having a body to represent you, and qualitative local representation of having a responsive body to represent you. And the sort of difference between what people were looking for in local representation, and that our current system could do quite well in that sort of constituency work of helping people navigate the system. I need to find out information about my pension or how to bring a family member into Canada or stuff like this and that. Their constituency assistants could do a great job of helping people navigate the system. What was missing was that sort of advocacy for the needs of your community. And that's what we were hearing people define as the local representation they were looking for. So those sort of challenges where we would say, hold on a second, we don't agree with your definition of local representation, or when we got more complex, hold on a second, we are trying to figure out what formula we're going to use to handle the transfer of surplus votes in STV, and the one we think isn't even on the short list, and we're gonna challenge why we think that, why we want to start considering other options. It showed that when you give citizens the time and the resources, they can come up with independent conclusions that challenge some of the accepted norms around this work and bring their sort of real lived experience to it. I went in, have to admit, not really appreciating the importance of local representation to most of my province. Having the privilege, the geographic privilege of living in the Lower Mainland and thinking, have we moved beyond local representation? Can we start to think more about other values that define us? And there's nothing as valuable as having the person sitting next to you saying, so to talk to my MLA in an area where I don't have reliable Wi-Fi, I have to get up an hour earlier in the morning, which means it's 4 a.m., to feed all my animals, to take a 4-hour drive, to hopefully get them on a day when they're in their office and available to me. And that lived experience was invaluable as we consider these issues. I think Anita touched on how important it was for people to be able to see, she alluded to their self in the process, that these were like real citizens. And we saw that time and time again as we went across the province, that people outside the Lower Mainland tended to already know members of the Citizens Assembly personally. And there's rolling polls coming out of UBC during the 2005 and 2009 referendums. But in 2005, what they were seeing was that the vast majority of British Columbians were saying that they had personally heard from a Citizens Assembly member during the campaign. Now that's impossible. There's no way 160 of us spoke to that many people, but that was their experience of it because we were from their communities. The Citizens Assembly was covered in every local paper every 2 weeks, what our meetings had been. The members were out doing presentations to Rotary, and that was covered in the local paper. And if I thought local papers didn't matter before, when in 2005, when I saw we got endorsements from pretty much every local paper, but the 2 Kamloops papers and the 2 ridings where we didn't exceed 50% were the 2 Kamloops papers, started to see the importance of those local papers and reflecting back to people what was happening in the community. So, and I'm going on a long time, so I'll start trying to wrap it up, sorry. I think what was important of what I haven't touched on was we built around creating an environment for consensus. We said nothing was decided until everything was decided. We started with more motherhood issues like our values, where it would be easier to get consensus. And then right at the end, sort of moved into the nitty-gritty details. And we designed both systems before choosing one of them. So even if you were primarily for one system over the other, and initially I was an MMP supporter, I helped design that STV, and I through my research became very comfortable with it and became an active advocate throughout the referendum. So it's important to sort of have that everybody involved in that process in that way. I think some things we can learn, we can say, why did we lose into 2005? The 2.3%, whatever, I think one of the things we tend to do as a movement is divide amongst ourselves. The part of the movement that said I'm for PR, but not this flavor of PR, really made, I think, could have been the difference in that 2.3%. And, that was a risky gamble to take, that next time we'll choose the right system. And 15 years later, I'm still waiting for something. So I think we really need to learn as a movement that when we have an opportunity for PR, we've got to be all in. And, we can tinker with it later, but we can't afford to divide amongst ourselves. There's also, I won't even go into what we learned from the referendum, but I think one of the particular challenges, I think why the Citizens Assembly worked was the intimacy that people had with a feeling of like someone just like me. And we've seen significant changes digitally. This was pre-Facebook. And so we've gone through a whole period where we've had the faux intimacy, and now we're seeing trust start to shift from that sort of someone just like me back to institutions. So going forward with the Citizens Assembly, how do we say, but this is the good type of real people. This is like not a bot just sharing an opinion on Facebook. These are genuine real people. That is a challenge that we're going to have to look at in building up that level of trust again. And I guess two other things is that was referred to, not only do we need money for education, we were about halfway through our process. We were like, wait a second, there's no money to go out and tell people what we are doing. And in fact, we had 2 cell phones. We raised money amongst ourselves, raised $800, and those paid for 2 cell phones for the course of the campaign that answered media calls. And then that was the number that Elections BC was giving people who called them to ask questions. They were calling myself or one other member to ask their questions because Elections BC had no information. But I think in terms of a Citizens Assembly, formalizing not just education, but actually that part of the Citizens Assembly members' job is to stay on for those months afterwards to be the people doing the education and going out there is really critical. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shoni.